Hello, and welcome to the 8th episode of Season 2 of The Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I'm Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner, Graham Barrow. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ray.
And here we are again, Graham, a week later than planned, but occasionally work just has to come first.
Well, it does, Ray, sadly, although I know we were both a bit disappointed not to have the time to record last week. But at least it gave some of our listeners an opportunity to provide us with some feedback.
Yes, and it seems the consensus of opinion is for us to go into a bit more depth about the use of cryptocurrencies in the world of money laundering.
Yes, but I think in order to do that, we now need to do an episode on the infrastructure within which all of this happens.
Indeed. And that means, bearing in mind the very positive response we had to our layperson's guide to crypto, the blockchain, and cryptography, we ought to do the same thing again in respect of the various webs, nets, and so on that comes with this particular territory.
Ray, I completely agree. So where do you want to start?
I think we'll start with the absolute basics, Graham. You remember the old saying we used to have in training, never underestimate people's ability, but always underestimate people's knowledge. So let's not take anything for granted and start out by making sure people understand the difference between the internet and the World Wide Web.
Good idea. And oddly, that's a bit like the difference we talked about last time between the blockchain and Bitcoin.
Exactly. One, the internet, is the architecture or infrastructure by which the other, the World Wide Web, is accessed.
Yeah, so one's the sweet shop and the other one is the sweets.
Well, one's the brain, the other one's the mind. Yeah. While we're at it, there are a couple more basic expressions we should clarify. The internet's more than just a network. It's a network of networks, lots of them working together to provide you and me with, hopefully, a seamless experience.
Yeah, that's the difference between an independent retailer and a whole chain of stores then.
Graham, I think we might be taking the analogy thing a bit far.
Yeah, probably.
And of course, we should point out the difference between the internet, which is an open network accessible by anyone with an internet-enabled device, and an intranet, which is generally located behind some sort of protected barrier, usually a form of password protection, and only accessible by those with the credentials to do so. And usually that's going to be within some form of enterprise.
Yes, so that's very true, and I'm sure most people listening will have their own work intranets that they access. So shall we move on to talking about all the different types of webs? The one most people know about tends these days to be referred to as the surface web, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, as opposed to the deep web. Most observers reckon the surface web represents only 5% or less of the total information contained within the internet.
So if the internet contains the body of information originated by humankind, the surface web is like the skin and the deep web is kind of everything else underneath.
Oh, yes, and that's a reasonable analogy, as our identities are usually established by our visible features, and the surface web is the part you can access with search engines because it's indexed by them.
Yes, and the deep web is everything underneath, which isn't indexed by search engines. And like X-rays or MRI scans, it requires special techniques to access.
Yeah, and a good job too. You wouldn't want your bank account to be located on the surface web, indexed and available to be viewed by anybody. You need a login, a password, and hopefully two-factor authentication to access that information.
Yes, exactly. And if you're sensible, a lot of your social media information should also be protected from idly gazing eyes. Privacy controls are there to make sure only the basic information is available on the surface web, and all that personally identifiable stuff is restricted to, frankly, the people that you want to see it.
Yep, and of course your webmail, direct messages on Twitter or LinkedIn, and a host of other stuff exists in the deep web and is invisible, thank goodness, to search engine crawlers, and so it can't be indexed.
Yeah, do you just want to explain, Ray? That's absolutely spot on, but let's just talk about what a crawler is before we go on.
Of course. We rather take it for granted when we put a search term into Google or Bing or my favourite, DuckDuckGo. that we will be given a whole range of potential websites to visit that might meet our requirements. But that doesn't happen easily. Such companies like Google expend huge effort sending out automated bots, known as crawlers these days, but they used to be called spiders, that are
Hmm.
constantly on the lookout for new web pages. Um, and Google adds those to its index, rather like the card index in the local library or the index at the back of a reference book, but on a much grander and multi-dimensional scale.
Exactly. But of course, unlike those other forms of index, the search engine also tries to work out which are the most relevant websites and put them at the top of the search outcome.
Yes, by a method called, by Google at least, PageRank, um, which interestingly isn't named after pages on the web. It's named after Larry Page, co founder of Google, which is quite a happy coincidence, really.
Yes, and it was, at least in part, the effectiveness of PageRank that propelled Google to the dominant position it holds today.
Indeed. So that's the deep web. Shall we talk about what's a subset of the deep web, the part that's become known as the dark web?
Yes, let's, because it is, after all, the bit that I guess is most relevant to dark money and therefore the dark money files and lots of other illicit activity.
Hmm. So, do you want to kick us off, Graham, by giving a bit of its history?
Okay, I guess the start was the development of the Onion Routing Project, or the Tor project, which was originally funded by the US Naval Research Laboratory. And oddly, so many things we see today are originally funded by US intelligence of
Hmm.
some sort or the other. Um, but we also need to be clear, I think, that there are two elements which carry the Tor label. And one is the Tor network, and the other is a Tor browser, and they're not the same thing.
No, absolutely. So, shall we start with the network?
Yes, I like to describe the Tor network as it's like a game of electronic pass the parcel. So when you send out a request to the Tor network, it's encrypted within several layers, hence the onion bit. So each Tor node, as it moves through the network to its ultimate destination, a layer of that is removed, exactly like what happens when the music stops in Pass the Parcel. And each successive receiver of that request can only see where it's just come from, not the originator. So being able to link the start and end points of a Tor request is thus nigh on impossible.
And presumably that works the same way on the return journey, so that when you request a web page through the Tor network, neither the request nor the delivery of the web page can be easily linked together.
Yeah, that's true. There is always, of course, metadata that can be read, like the browser you're using, your screen resolution, and the like, but not the search terms or the web pages that are returned following that request.
Okay. Now, then there's the Tor Browser, which allows you to access certain special websites on the Tor network, which forms part of the dark web. And you can always tell a Tor specific site because rather than having a .com or .co.uk suffix, the website address ends with .onion.
Yeah, they have such a sense of humour, those developers, don't they?
Hysterical, Graham.
But there are some special attributes of .onion sites, though, aren't there, Ray?
Yes, they're generally 16 character strings, which can be made up of any of the 26 letters of the alphabet plus the numbers 2 to 7, which means, for the techies out there, it represents an 80-bit hash.
That's interesting because I've seen .onion sites that, at least in part, have readable web addresses. For example, there's an anonymous brokerage site on Tor where the first 9 letters of the URL are Tor Broker. And Facebook famously managed to create a .onion site with the address Facebook core wwwi.
Well, you say famously, Graham.
Well, in my world.
Yeah. But it is interesting because they're the result of a massive computational exercise which churns out huge numbers of potential addresses until one is found with at least some recognizable characters. And in Facebook's case, they maintain they got extremely lucky finding a .onion address that was so relevant to their service.
And we should point out that anyone who wants to access Facebook in a highly secure environment can do so over Tor using their .onion access point.
Indeed. And now I guess we need to talk about some of the other stuff that happens over Tor and other parts of the dark web.
Yeah, shall we start with the Silk Road?
Yeah, let's do that. It was probably the first darknet site that came to public prominence. As most people probably know, its main activity was the sale of illicit drugs. And to relate back to last week's episode, the currency in which they were traded was Bitcoin.
Yeah, and it's one of the oddities of Bitcoin, isn't it, that it's possible to trace pretty much every Bitcoin in circulation, and yet they remain, by and large, anonymously owned.
Yes. Now, I know there are technical considerations that would cause those who really understand these things to challenge some of these statements, but by and large, they hold true. Bitcoin is a publicly traded store of value, but to a large degree, with the use of some clever software, it's possible to mask the owner of the Bitcoin almost completely.
And of course, that's what makes it so attractive to the underworld. If you put an anonymous network together with an
Hmm.
anonymous store of value, you get what is almost the perfect storm for criminal activity.
Yeah. Now we should talk about the mastermind behind the Silk Road, Graham. This guy called Ross Ulbricht, better known as Dread Pirate Roberts, a name taken from the novel The Princess Bride by William Goldman, a really great book that they didn't completely ruin as a film either.
No, and I've got to confess, I've neither read nor seen. So, one for my
No,
list of things. Yeah, I know. I'm too busy making podcasts, Ray.
they're
Um,
both are worthy of your time, Graham.
having done the research for the podcast, I have now definitely put it on my list of things to do.
Okay,
Um,
good.
but as an aside, of course, William Goldman also wrote Marathon Man,
Yeah.
which some people will remember was turned into a film with Laurence Olivier and Dustin Hoffman. And if, like me, you've never particularly enjoyed a trip to the dentist, it's got one of the scariest scenes you will ever watch.
Yeah, not for those frightened of the dentist or of long runs.
No, no,
Yeah, so let's get back to the subject, shall we?
yeah.
Albrecht was eventually arrested. It was one of those joining the dots moments, a bit like so many of the laundromat episodes we've previously recounted, when an alert
Hmm.
investigator realised there was a connection between Dread Pirate Roberts, Silk Road, and Albrecht. In the early days of Silk Road, posts had been made under the pseudonym Altoid, and a post on a surface website by someone using the Altoid pseudonym and providing a mail address comprising all of Albrecht's full name.
It was a really great piece of detective work. And when they arrested him, which was in a San Francisco public library,
Hmm.
the FBI was so concerned that he would either encrypt or delete all the files before they could stop him. They actually got two of their agents to have a heated, kind of like lovers' quarrel right next to him, which distressed him so much. A third agent managed to grab his laptop and hand it over to one of their computer experts who shoved in a flash drive and copied off all the files.
And he was alleged to have tried to have six people murdered, wasn't
Yeah, amongst other things, that's
he?
true.
Although he was never found guilty of that, he was found guilty of money laundering and a host of other charges and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole.
Yeah, and I think they seized a few bitcoins from his laptop, didn't they?
Well, more than a few, actually. Altogether, the FBI said it had seized around 170,000 bitcoins, which would have been worth at their height more than $3 billion.
Whoa.
According to the FBI, they sold most of them off at auction. Forbes magazine said they went for an average price of $334, which at the time seemed pretty good, but compared even to their current price of about $8,700, looks a tad undervalued.
Yes, and that's the thing about these underworld stories, Ray, isn't it? So often they actually seem stranger than anything Goldman could have written.
Yes, so let's do a quick summary. Over the past 2 weeks, we've looked at the blockchain, cryptocurrencies, cryptography, the surface web, the deep web, and the dark web.
And hasn't it been fun?
Mm.
And hopefully along the way, we've helped at least some of our audience understand a bit better the differences between them.
And their potential to be misused. But we shouldn't
Hmm.
just leave it there, Graham. They're not just places for criminals, and even the dark web has an important role to play for the likes of you and me if we're so minded.
Well, I agree, Ray. After all, it's a very secure environment. And for most people, if they are worried about their internet security, it does offer a huge amount of protection.
Yes, we really ought to make clear that using the Tor network is not in any way illegal, neither is downloading the Tor browser. Combined, they can make things like internet banking, social media posting, and all sorts of other activities highly secure.
And it provides an exceptionally effective route for, say, whistleblowers to send information over the internet very securely. It's known, for example, that Edward Snowden leaked the NSA, that's the National Security Agency in America, security files to the UK Guardian newspaper via the dark web.
Yes, and it is used allegedly by a large number of informants and spies who do not have access to more traditionally secure channels to report back to their masters at home.
Yeah, but it is also, we have to say, home to a staggering number of sites offering drugs and credit cards and guns and other highly illicit services.
Indeed, along with a plethora of forums detailing how to hack, steal, defraud, and all sorts of other nefarious activities.
Yeah, so, I mean, it ends up, it's a bit like the old Wild West in that respect, isn't it? It's an interesting
Mm.
new environment that is open to all sorts of possibilities, but
Hmm.
fraught with danger and which needs navigating with care.
Yes, and there are some movie and photographic image sites on the dark web that simply accessing and having the movies or images coming up on your computer screen would cause you to commit a criminal act. So you do need to be careful if you're going to start that particular journey of discovery.
On the other hand, if you're an anti-financial crime professional, especially if you're involved in investigations, it really is important to understand how the Tor network and Tor browser and the dark web generally works.
Yes, it is. And we should point out that there are other dark webs and other ways of accessing them, but Tor is by far the most common.
Yeah. So if there are firms out there who feel it would be beneficial to get a more tailored face-to-face introduction to the dark web, worth pointing out, Ray, that we do run an in-house workshop, which we'd be delighted to arrange for you.
Exactly. Often people are a bit fearful of taking the first step. And getting an introduction to some of these sites in a controlled environment is a useful and important way of doing so.
Yeah, so if you're interested, please contact either of us. I can be reached at graham.barrow@thedarkmoneyfiles.com.
And you can use that information to work out how to contact me in a similar way. We've also got various social media sites that we maintain on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter that aren't very difficult to find.
Yep, and there's also a contact page on our website at thedarkmoneyfiles.com.
Okay, I think we're done with the commercial messages and with the meat of today's episode, Graham. Where are we going next week?
Well, Ray, we did say at the end of the last episode that we were going to look at regtech and fintech and artificial intelligence and machine learning and lots of other futuristic sounding subjects. So I think having now done this piece around the deep and dark web and the rest of it, we should go back and start talking about them.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dark Money Files. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to listen to future episodes, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or your normal podcast provider.